Well, I think a lot of them try to even look like Richard.
Right.
A lot of them cats, Steve Harvey and Tim Reed, they all try to look like Richard Pryor.
What are you talking about? What are you, nuts?
I said, who won't pay you? Club owners. Well, I said, oh, that motherfucker gonna pay me.
You know, nobody ever tried to blow out somebody else's candle to make their own.
Steve Harvey earned himself a reputation as a role model in the entertainment industry, and many aspiring comedians and showmen are looking at this industry giant like a godlike create. Harvey has been successful over decades, and he's always proud of his rise to the stardom. However, not everyone believes his blatant lies about originality and talent, and recently, the comedian has been bashed by his ex-colleague DL Hughley, who revealed that Steve Harvey is a thief since he made his best to steal the identity of another comedian, Richard Pryor.
That caused a little bit of attention, friction, and it was weird for a little while. But
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Celeb Live Channel. So, the similarity between two comedians is undeniable, but according to DL Hughley, it's not a coincidence, and Steve tried his best to imitate Richard in order to make himself a name. While it may seem just allegations and another attempt to stain Steve's reputation, but when you look at the photos of these two people together, you can't help but notice that they are almost identical. But let's dive into the story of how Steve was stealing Richard's image step by step, and you'll see that DL Hughley has all the reasons to confront Harvey and call him a thief. Well, Steve Harvey doesn't hide the fact that Richard Pryor is one of the greatest influencers in his life and basically his comedy hero.
And I turned around, it was Richard Pryor. And I couldn't even breathe, man. It was Richard Pryor.
But it didn't prevent him from going behind Richard's back and take more than just one page from his book. It looks like Steve Harvey wanted it all so badly, so he decided to imitate his idol completely, starting for appearance. Now, DL Hughley has witnessed another vicious stab made by Steve. When Bernie Mac was casted for the Ocean's 11 dynasty, Steve Harvey went to the director and producer to try and steal the role from him and even told them he would take less money. They said no. At this point, it became clear for DL Hughley that Steve wouldn't rest until he's famous and rich, and no obstacles and limits were gonna stop from getting what he wanted.
And that was the spark that made me think, man, I could be something. Because he kept saying, I am the greatest.
According to DL Hughley, Steve has built his entire career feeding off Pryor's image and lifestyle. And while it's always great to have a source of inspiration, apparently, Steve went a little too far with his imitation, and he basically turned himself into a poor copy of Richard. However, in the industry where everyone closely watches each other, and it soon became obvious that Steve basically was turning himself into the next Richard Pryor, even with the way he told his jokes.
Or what? But it just looked like somebody pushing him in the ass all the time.
Now, when you watch any performance of Richard Pryor, you can notice the horrifying resemblance in the tone and the way these two comedians are taking necessary pauses. And it may be just guys, but it looks like if you can't tell both stand-up comedians apart, and if they say the same joke, we'll be sitting and wondering who it actually belongs to. Here's a part of Richard's performance.
I was leaving, and I was sitting in the hotel, and a voice said to me, said, look around, what do you see?
As the Family Feud host's career was soaring to new heights, the fact that he was imitating Richard Pryor became too oblivious for many people, and John Witherspoon once openly mentioned in this interview that Richard was a very popular stand-up comedian.
Richard was very popular. He's one of my favorites. Who else could it be? I mean,
So, no wonder that young and aspiring comics like Steve Harvey tried their best to be like Richard. However, as John mentioned, Steve went a little too far, and he basically created his own stand-up image and identity by using Richard as a role model.
well, I think a lot of them try to even look like Richard.
Right.
A lot of them cats, Steve Harvey and Tim Reed, they all try to look like Richard Pryor.
Now, it may be a bold thing to tell this to Steve Harvey's face that his entire career is built on plagiarism, but it looks like the comedians truly can't stand Steve because of dishonest ways he was using to make himself a household name in the entertainment industry. However, Steve could have fooled himself by thinking that he was hardworking and original comic. The social media users don't hold back and mention the physical resemblance between two comedians. As one user wrote, I was wondering when somebody famous was going to say it. He'll never be a Richard Pryor, but he's definitely a copycat. And another user added, I can't stand Steve Harvey, especially for what he did to his first wife. He is not a decent man. Well, yeah, there are already a lot of ugly stories about Steve Harvey's true nature. So make sure to check my other videos about the dirty activities the famous comedian is doing. But back to our story. It seems like Steve Harvey doesn't think of himself as a pitiful copycat, as he's sure of his unshaken originality.
This is exactly how I feel. I want to live like.
And here's another thing that makes DL Hughley believe that Steve's success is based on his imitation of Richard Pryor. Apparently, before meeting his idol in flesh in 1995, Steve couldn't find his way in stand-up, and the prospects of his career were looking rather gruesome. But in 1996, when Steve finally realized what he got to do to get a big breakthrough in his career, to copy an already successful person and hope to replace him, well, since that moment, his career soared. In 1996, Steve started hosting his flagship show, The Steve Harvey Show, which ran for 6 seasons until 2002. The show was especially very popular in the African American community, and up to this day, Steve himself believes that meeting Richard Pryor was the biggest moment of his life.
I met Richard Pryor. That was the biggest moment of my life.
As Steve himself shared once on his Instagram, meeting his comedy idol was one of the most life-turning events of his life. As the comedian later shared, he got so emotional after meeting the legend that he cried for 20 minutes straight. He was the whole reason I got in comedy, you know? I got through talking with him. The ABC Comedy Awards was in this huge hangar they'd decorated. I went behind the bar, cried for 20 minutes. Other stand-up comedians such as Martin Lawrence, Chris Rock, and Eddie Murphy have all mentioned that Richard Pryor was their biggest influence as well, but no one was so pathetic as to steal the whole identity as Steve Harvey. And that's why DL Hughley cannot keep silence, seeing this outrageous and shameful plagiarism.
Say the things I say. It's not about hate. It's about I can't let you do these things, knowing what I know and pretend like I don't.
Although Steve Harvey now thinks he's a Richard Pryor of his generation, and many young comedians are looking at him as a godlike figure and seek his advice on their careers as comedians, it seems like people who have been there with Steve since the start see right through his thievish nature, and it's not the first time when the Family Feud host is accused of copying someone else's work or image. A couple of years ago, comedian Mark Curry blasted Harvey for violating a code of honor among comedians. And he claimed that Harvey stole his comedy routine. Steve stole my material on his show, so I had a beef on that. When he was on his Beast talk show that he did all of my Halloween material one Halloween. However, it's not surprising for DL Hughley to see the stories like this surfacing because he himself witnessed how Steve Harvey was tried to take everything that's not his.
I've seen that before I knew a word was what word it was. I don't even know what human being think that's okay.
There's been also talk about Steve Harvey's dubious talents as a writer, and it seems like when working on his book Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, he decided to simply copy everything with minor changes. However, after seeing what Steve Harvey is capable of to reach certain heights, it doesn't even surprise DL Hughley anymore. All he now wants is for Steve to admit that he's fake and stop behaving like a king of comedy because he's just a poor copycat of other talented and funny people, and he's afraid to show his real self.
And you know who you were, and they know, and all of a sudden it becomes about you wanting to do something to show them that you just...
Well, looks like Steve Harvey has been cornered by his own fellow comedian. And let's see if he's going to say anything about these accusations. When rewatching 2 performances of Richard and Steve, people notice more and more similarities, and they say that Steve Harvey looks like a poorly executed version of a legendary comedian Richard Pryor. As one user wrote, Steve Harvey will never be close to being as funny as Richard Pryor. Never. And another user added, I cannot stand this guy. He let the money go to his head. He's a rich, dark-skinned man who is extremely wealthy, and he has said a lot of racist things against every race but his own with little to no repercussions. And he's a comedian, therefore he is going to use the "it's just a joke" line a lot. Well, even fans are unhappy with Steve's ways to make it big, and it seems like there's actually nothing genuine and honest in this guy. And what do you think about this, guys? Has Steve Harvey actually copied Richard's style on purpose? And could Steve make a career without walking on other comedians' heads? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to know what you're thinking, and in the meantime, check my other videos about the dark side of the industry giants. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned, and I promise to be back very soon